Well, Prime Minister Modi has arrived in South Africa to participate in the upcoming BRICS Summit scheduled to take place over the next 3 days alongside the leaders of Brazil, China, Russia and South Africa. He will be convening in Johannesburg. Now, this marks the first in-person BRICS Summit since 2019, as the previous 3 years saw virtual meetings due to the COVID-19 pandemic. While a potential bilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping remains uncertain, Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra 2 days ago had stated that the Prime Minister's schedule is still in the process of development. As Prime Minister Modi embarked on his journey to the BRICS Summit, he emphasized that the event would offer a valuable platform for members' countries to identify and foster future areas of collaboration. And without further ado, to discuss the matters further, we are joined by Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Senior Journalist, Foreign Affairs, and also Ramakrishnan Sridharan, Consulting Editor, News9, joins us all the way from Washington, D.C. Shri, let me begin with you first. Obviously, the kind of fanfare that we see on the screen, the kind of reception that Prime Minister Modi received, or generally he receives, be it any part of the world, I would say, is remarkable. But as far as the presence of India at BRICS is concerned, how do you read that to begin with?
Well, Pankaj, India is, of course, a key constituent of BRIC, which later became BRICS in 2010 with the inclusion of South Africa. But I see some interesting dynamics at play in BRICS 2023. One is the fact that the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has invited leaders from 67 other countries, which tells that there is an active effort, maybe at the behest of China and Russia, to expand the BRICS consortium, the informal arrangement, the agreement, the grouping that exists between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa to a larger countries. So this is obviously going to serve the interest of China, which wants to see, position itself as a global hegemon, and Russia, which currently is as a global pariah in some sense, with all the sanctions against Russia from US and other European countries. Of course, India has maintained a neutral stance. Therefore, I expect under Prime Minister Modi, we've had a very clear foreign policy, which is that India first, we will do what is in our interest. Therefore, if you see the pre-departure statement of Prime Minister Modi, he's only talked about a global south. He hasn't gone overboard in terms of what he expects from the BRICS summit. So India's position would be that we are here to work with any partner of the world, but we'll be wary of anything which can emerge as an anti-West combined, because India does not believe in that sort of animosity or a position which is seen as inimical to friendly countries and other developed countries. So I think India's tone at the BRICS Summit will be quite measured, Pankaj.
Right, Shri. We are also joined by Pramit. Welcome to the show, Pramit. Obviously, as Shri mentions from the United States, that the expansion of BRICS, I believe it cuts both ways. And as far as India's presence there, countries like India and Brazil obviously have shown time and again their cautious approach towards this expansion of this BRICS nations. How do you see that? Do you believe that this desire for influence, as far as China is concerned, could weigh heavy in the days to come in BRICS?
This is going to be the primary problem or the primary fault line inside the BRICS right now, which is that China wants to position the BRICS as well as other organizations like the SCO as effectively rivals to similar Western groupings like the G7. And for them, because they are the dominant or the largest country in terms of economics as well as population in some cases, the largest member of such organizations, they feel that these are organizations that automatically be close to China. On top of that, thanks to the present situation in Ukraine, Russia is now unwilling to take an independent line from China. So they're in a very strong position. So expansion for the BRICS is really about creating a block of nations who they hope will eventually become or be guided to become rivals or opponents to the West. India does not support this position. Brazil does not support this position. And internally, from what I've heard, nor does South Africa. So these three countries within the BRICS have said that this is not acceptable. However, there is a political cost to this. China has run a campaign in many of the countries that have asked to join and said, oh, India is to blame, that it is not happening, otherwise we support it. So India and Brazil and South Africa have said that we will support a criteria-based BRICS expansion and in effect stick the whole process into a committee and drag it out. But there are clearly two countries, I think Saudi Arabia and Indonesia, who are front runners for joining. But many of the other countries are not seen as fitting in with the BRICS, or in the case of South Africa and Brazil, they're actually not internally very happy at having rival countries from their own continents. Brazil is definitely against Argentina or Mexico joining. South Africa would prefer to be the only African country in the BRICS. So therefore, that dynamic is going on. But China's efforts have only just begun, and they will wait for moments of weakness among other governments to push this agenda.
Right, Pramit and Shri, stay with us. We will quickly play out the bite of Arindam Bagchi, the sound bite when Prime Minister landed in South Africa. Right after that, Mr. Bagchi interacted with the media. Let's listen in and then we continue with the discussion.
On his visit to attend the 15th BRICS Summit, behind us we have, as a special gesture, the Deputy President of South Africa, who's here at the airport to receive him. A formal ceremonial guard of honor is going to be extended to him. As you can see, the South African side is now going up to the aircraft to welcome Prime Minister here. Prime Minister has a packed schedule here. Later in the day, he's attending the BRICS Business Forum, the leaders part of the ceremony, and then he has a closed retreat later to the BRICS leaders. Tomorrow is the open and closed ceremonies of the BRICS Summit, and day after is the outreach sessions.
Well, noisy, windy Johannesburg for you, obviously. Shri, talking about not very long ago, we saw Prime Minister Modi, visiting United States, and obviously the kind of reception he got, a totally different out-of-the-world scenario there. But when it comes to, the same kind of, approach, whether, United States and India, obviously, biggest trading partners, ties are evolving and at a rapid pace more than ever before. How, is it that the case that India can ill afford as of now to have a BRICS expansion in which China, manages to have, an upper hand, a bigger say? Do you believe that somehow that will dilute India's presence, or is it a tight balance that India will have to approach the expansion with?
Well, Pankaj, look at what is happening geopolitically. There is a clear shift away from China, and US and Europe is moving closer to India, largely in recognition of the fact that India is not just a growing economy and home to 1.4 billion people, but it is also probably the better friend to have in that region, which can counter China's aspiration to be a global hegemon. So I think India's interests are very clearly spelled out. India believes in putting its own interests first, and even we talked about the Russia-Ukraine war, where India has said we continue buying oil because India is a growing country. We have oil needs. So I think India's stance has been very clear that we ourselves will not want to align or create any kind of divisions or obvious kind of stress points in the global order, but we will continue to work in the direction that benefits India and the people of India. And I don't think there's any two ways about it, or there's any confusion as far as India's foreign policy is concerned. And at the moment, we are very closely aligned with the US, and our interests as a country are served by maintaining good relations with all big countries, including China. I mean, India never goes after China in that sense. We always make very measured kind of approach. I mean, the aggression, if anything, is largely from China, which demands that world give it the kind of respect that it thinks it deserves. So that's a perception issue. But India has never sought to destabilize the economic or the global order, whether it's economic or political. So I think there's a lot of maturity on India's front, which is appreciated by US and now, rest of the world.
Right. Gentlemen, talking about such, gathering, such conglomerate of nations, obviously one crucial aspect that the world cannot turn a blind eye to is the aspect of terrorism. And BRICS Counter-Terrorism Working Group, CTWG, as it is called, Pramit, how big a role do you believe that BRICS could play and should play, rather, as far as countering global terror is concerned?
Well, this, of course, has been a standard theme with India, and we've traditionally received, and it's a topic that most countries obviously are fully supportive. The question is your terrorist the same as my terrorist? In the BRICS, we can count on most of these countries to support us. Even China will support the precept, but obviously they will fight to not have Pakistan mentioned specifically as a state sponsor of terrorism. Terrorism has declined as an immediate threat for large portions of the world since the fall of the Islamic State in the Middle East. And the Taliban regime that has come to power or come back to power in Afghanistan, while it remains a huge safe haven for some of the world's most lethal terrorists, including Lashkar-e-Taiba, Al-Qaeda, and the ISIS, has actually focused its attentions on fighting Pakistan. So curiously enough, you have another state sponsor of terror fighting another state sponsor of terror, if you wish, and India watching on the sidelines. But terrorism is there. It will continue to be part of the agenda. It obviously hasn't gone away and may come back again one day. But we can see in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where Pakistan is an actual member, this has not necessarily we've not been able to push that agenda very far. In the BRICS, Pakistan is not a member, obviously, so the language is probably something we will be able to get through, but clearly a mention of Pakistan will not be possible given China's membership of the BRICS.
Right. Shri, talking about India's role and but the issues at hand, obviously terrorism being one of them. Then there's climate change, digital connectivity, food security. These are some of the issues that India has time and again raised on international platforms. And as we witnessed a few months back, it has the backing of developed economies like United States and the European conglomerate, also European nations also. Do you believe that when India speaks at BRICS, it also carries the weight of the West behind it, firstly? And secondly, do you believe that India could be the one game changer because it has relations, decent relations, I would say, in order to get things done as far as or making the world hear what it wants to say?
Right. So I think the first thing to recognize, Pankaj, is that India as a country speaks for itself. And if it says something that aligns with what West also feels, I mean, that's great. But I don't think India is speaking for, let's say, any Western country or for any other country. India, I think, speaks for itself and what is in benefit of India's interest. So I think we are in a position to make our own independent stand. But obviously, the intent is to carry all other emerging economies together. You talked about climate change, terrorism. All our interests are aligned to that extent, right? If one country is experiencing problem, as we've seen, the problem, especially when it comes to people, it does turn into a humanitarian crisis, which then starts affecting all other countries. So the best interest of all our nations is solved by working together. And I think that is really the attempt at BRIC right now, where countries are trying to look at a lot of development. Last year, the theme was development issues. This year, we're looking at BRIC and Africa countries. So I think BRIC, as a bunch of emerging economies, does have responsibility at some level to take other smaller countries together. But in what shape, in what form, and do they need to be formal members of BRICS is a different issue, which I think will be addressed, and answers will emerge over the next course of the two-day discussion that's going to happen, and maybe over the next year. And these are all things that will continue, Pankaj. So India, coming back to your question, India obviously speaks for itself,
right.
And if it consonants with what West also advocates, I mean, that's good news to my mind.
Absolutely, absolutely, Shri. Appreciate your inputs there. Pramit, talking about a balanced global power structure, many would say, it is a myth in these days. We have a member, Russia, which is engaged in an ongoing battle with Ukraine, and the shadows obviously are there on this particular event also, with President Putin choosing not to be here for some other reasons though. How do you believe that the gathering of BRICS would view, or rather should be viewing, the Ukraine war perspective?
Well, I think most of the BRICS countries will try to avoid Ukraine as much as possible. Fundamentally, Ukraine is seen by almost all the BRICS members, except for Russia, which is directly involved, as a problem, but not a problem that they have anything to do or say about. Most of the BRICS members have either abstained or been very cautious in the UN in regards to the Ukrainian UN resolutions in the Ukraine. South Africa has actually been very supportive of Russia, gone out of its way to say that we don't see this war as something of a matter of our concern. India obviously has been neutral, given its own dependence on Russia for military equipment, and China obviously has been very supportive of Russia. Brazil has been probably the one that has voted the most or often against the Russians at the UN, but there's no clear BRICS position, and none of these countries see the war as their priority other than Russia. What Russia will not get and does not expect is a vote in support of their position on the Ukraine war, and that's probably good enough for them, that they can go away and say, oh, look, the BRICS countries, emerging economies of the world, don't seem to actually care about this war. And they don't care about the West's insistence that this is a global problem, simply not the case.
All right. Shri, my colleague Neha Khanna spoke to G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant last evening. And Amitabh mentioned one crucial aspect, that G20 is a body which is more relevant these days than the United Nations Security Council also. Now, India has bid for its permanent membership at the UNSC. Obviously, I'm bringing it closer to you because, the issues at hand as of now vis-a-vis United Nations, how do you see this BRICS, the association of the countries, vis-a-vis the United Nations, the relevance part, and also in the days to come, how significant it would be?
I don't think it's fair to compare BRICS with the UN, Pankaj, because the two are totally different. United Nations has legal moral authority behind it, whereas BRICS is just a coalition of emerging economies, and a permanent seat on the UN Security Council carries a lot of weight. I mean, but I don't think, unfortunately, it's going to come to India as long as China is there and it wants to veto our entry into the permanent council. So I think they're two different creatures that we are talking about, and I don't think it's either or. I think BRICS has a certain purpose that it serves on the economic, social, political front, and UN, of course, is a multilateral, institution which has a far greater standing and far greater moral and legal heft compared to BRICS, which is essentially about cooperation and looking for sustained development jointly with emerging economies. So these are two different entities altogether, Pankaj, to my mind.
Right.
And neither is going to do the other's job to that extent.
Right. Pramit, talking about, again, focusing on South Africa and the gathering after 3 years, this in-person meeting is happening. Obviously, there are expectations. There are some government changes also, say in Brazil for that matter. South Africa too has been struggling as far as the economic part is concerned. How best do you think that this gathering of the nations helps the member countries to work within themselves a strategy, a plan, an economic association that could help to pave the way to progress?
BRICS doesn't have much convergence, if you wish, on the economic front. These are five very disparate economies. And China dominates in the sense that China is the number one and number two trading partner for all of these five countries, the other four countries. But we, like to say, the other four countries don't trade with each other very much. India does not trade with Brazil. Brazil does not trade with Russia. India and South Africa have a little amount of trade, but it's not very big. And on the investment side, it's almost it's an even worse story, if you wish, in which almost none of the five members invest very much in each other. So you can't expect too much convergence on the economic front. What we are seeing is that yes, do we see emerging economies have certain common interests regarding the present situation in the global economy? To some degree, yes. Little concerns about protectionism, concerns about some inequality issues. There is a move to have a BRICS currency. I don't think India is very clear that it doesn't support that, probably for fear that that would just become a Chinese-controlled BRICS currency. But the idea of bilateral trading done in local currencies is something that all sides, at least in principle, would agree to, because that would help save their foreign exchange reserves from being run down, especially in the case of the India, South Africa, and Brazil. But there's a limit. India, one of the reasons the rupee and ruble trade agreement or attempts to create a new agreement between India and Russia collapsed was simply because Russia didn't buy anything from India. They said, yes, we have a lot of things to export to you. And so the trade is very lopsided. There's a huge amount of rupees coming to Russia as a consequence of the trade. When it hit about $20 billion worth, the Russians said, forget it, enough. We don't buy anything from India. India doesn't export anything Russia is interested in. So we don't want to do this anymore. And the same, as I said, because trade figures are so weak among the BRICS, what exactly are you going to be trading in? United Arab Emirates and India have agreed on local trade, currency trade, because both of them have a very large bilateral trade and investment relationship. But that doesn't exist in many of the other countries. So BRICS, yes, it has a certain set of principles in economics, that it has a common point of view. But in practical terms, we don't still do enough with each other for this to be worthwhile.
Right. Now, Shri, what Pramit mentions, obviously, nothing much, to talk about, or not much trade between among these BRICS nations. But obviously, we have seen one increasing trend, talking about the expansion part here, that unlike other countries of the BRICS get-together, BRICS conglomerate, China has shown immense interest, immense action as far as the whole African continent is concerned, especially Western Africa, where China is developing not just dams, but housing societies to infrastructures. Do you believe that India should also use this opportunity to move beyond just South Africa, not including the members of other African countries, but take active interest as far as the other countries in Africa is concerned, maybe the remotest part?
So, Pankaj, what you're referring to is often called the checkbook diplomacy, right? Where China, huge savings, is able to make investments in countries, including Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, and it has been buying influence. Now, is India going to play the same game? One, I don't think we have the kind of reserves that China has. We are not a $17 trillion economy. We are let's say, a roughly $4 trillion economy. And we have our own needs, investment needs, which are prioritized over, let's say, some other countries. So while foreign aid is different, but I don't think India as a foreign policy uses checkbook diplomacy to win influence. I think India's relevance comes from the fact that it is a democratic country. It's a country of 1.4 billion people. It is a country where judicial systems work much better. It is not a dictatorial country. So these are all the strong points. And, India is already a services hub. Now we are focused on manufacturing. So I think India would rather, play this global diplomacy on a different note compared to China. We don't necessarily need to write checks to win friends, Pankaj. I think behavior and how we conduct ourselves on the international stage, and how we invite others to come and participate in India's economy, economic growth, and the role we play in ensuring stability in the region and ensuring that there's common prosperity for all. I think those are far bigger pulls than the checkbook diplomacy, which comes with its own peril for the beneficiary nations. For example, whether it is Pakistan or any African country or even scores of Latin American countries, it comes with China's strong hand in their internal affairs. China ends up literally holding these countries to ransom because they go so much into debt that they're not able to repay the money. Therefore, China ends up controlling these critical assets. So I don't think any country should want to be in that position. And India, I don't think, believes in that sort of a game, to my mind, Pankaj.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this informed discussion on BRICS. I'm sure as the delegates meet, the heads of the nations meet in Johannesburg, a beautiful city, I would once again say, all eyes, I would say, would be on these countries, especially would be also bringing you up updates from Johannesburg. Thank you so much.